Good afternoon. I want to thank everyone for coming over, and today's our kickoff day for our lecture series that the Hispanic Center of Excellence is hosting this entire week and the next 2 days next week. Our first speaker, I'm delighted to introduce him because he's not only a colleague but a dear friend of mine, Dr. Carl Eschbach. He's a sociologist and a demographer. He's a professor and director of population research in the Department of Internal Medicine, and he's in the Division of Geriatrics. And he also holds a secondary appointment in the Department of Preventive Medicine and Community Health. He received his doctorate in sociology from Harvard University and completed a postdoctoral traineeship in demography at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dr. Eschbach's research specialties are in the demography of racial and ethnic populations, with particular focus on Latino and American Indians, Alaska Native populations, as well as socioeconomic and health disparities pertaining to minority populations. Dr. Eschbach served as a state demographer of Texas from 2008 to 2010, with responsibility for advising government agencies on the impact of population changes on state service demands. His research currently focuses on explanations of patterns of lower mortality among Latinos in Texas and the United States, and on geographic variation in health among Latinos. Please help me welcome Dr. Eschbach.
Thank you, Norma. Thank you for your kind introduction, as well as for the invitation to speak today, and to the audience for showing up and giving me a chance to talk about, I think, one of the most important and interesting subjects that we all face. These are really interesting times. Back after the 2000 census, I remember I made maps. I was living in Houston at the time, and I made maps showing changes in the distribution of the population, of the Latino population, and the other populations of Houston, Texas. And in those maps, I was showing where in the Houston area, I was showing by large blue dots where population was increasing, and by large red dots where population was shrinking. And we did that by ethnicity. So if you looked at the map for Anglos, non-Hispanic whites, you would see that there were some areas that were experiencing population loss, and other areas that were experiencing population gain. And the same was true for African Americans. And when you got to the Latino map, it was basically big blue dots everywhere. I mean, population was growing in all places in the city and in the whole region. So I took the map to a friend, a Mexican American friend, and pointed out to her, well, you know, it looks like you guys are taking over. And she responded, "Nah, we're not taking it over. We're taking it back." And you know, it's certainly true that the kinds of changes that we're looking at today are really creating a transformation. I'm going to show you shortly slides that show that here in the state of Texas, it's going to be within at most a couple decades before the Latino population becomes an absolute majority of the state of Texas, 50% plus one. And along with that increase, there's going to be a very substantial change in the characteristics, the diversity of the population that I think are very important to pay attention to and think about. And then a final point, I'm going to give a Texas-centric talk today, but essentially, it's not an afterthought to say essentially that as Texas goes, there goes the United States, not too far after. And I will show information that illustrates that. So the themes that I'm going to talk about today include the rapid growth of the population. It's looking at its spatial redistribution, the growing diversity of the Hispanic population, diversity in terms of national origins, native and immigrant differentials, and increasingly socioeconomic status. And then briefly at the end, I'm going to talk about a topic that that others later in the week, I'm sure, will present. I'm going to introduce the notion of the Hispanic paradox, the notion that Latinos have lower levels of mortality than, for example, non-Hispanic whites in the United States, despite their lower socioeconomic status and despite their some important health disadvantages. Okay, so let's begin by looking at data at the national origins of Latinos in both the United States and in Texas. You can see that there are, in the United States now, this is from the 2010 census, a little over 50 million Hispanics in the state of Texas, about 9.5 million Hispanics. In Texas, as throughout the Southwest, the population is predominantly Mexican American. You see 84% in Texas, 63% of the Hispanic population in the nation are of Mexican origin. At the very bottom of this chart, you see after listing some of the other national origin groups, you see all other and non-specific, and you see that all other and non-specific is about 7% of the population. Well, who are they? Largely in the state of Texas, they're Mexicans. They're people who have chosen, when reporting their identity on the census, to say that they are Hispanic or Latino, but not to declare a specific national origin. So when you take that into account, and I won't explain how I know that, but there are other data indicators that we can use to find that out. When you take into that account, really about 90% of the Latino population of the state are of Mexican origin. Looking at population growth, this is showing you population growth in the nation. Total population, the population of Latinos in 1970, the first time that the census did a complete enumeration of Latinos in the United States. There were 9.6 million Latinos in the whole country, up to over 50 million today. There were, in the state of Texas, approximately 2 million Latinos, up to over 9 million today. As a percentage of the population, Latinos increased from 5% in the nation in 1970 to 16% today, from 18% in the state of Texas to about 38% today. This is important, and I'm going to show you a little more information about this. This is showing you the share of population growth in each decade that is attributable to the Latino population. Between 1970 and 1980, for example, a third of the population increase in the state of Texas was an increase in the Latino population. Fast forward to the decade from 2000 to 2010, and that figure is 65%. So 2/3, essentially, of the population growth in the state in the last decade, and over half of the population growth in the nation in the last decade is accounted for by Latino population growth. This is showing you the growth of the Latino population compared to other populations, ethnic populations in the last decade in the state of Texas. You see here again that the percentage increase for Latinos was 42% in the decade. The percent of growth was 65%. But this, the other thing to pay attention to on this slide is the Anglo contribution. Right? We think of Anglos and we talk about Anglos, and I use that term as we do frequently in the state to refer to non-Hispanic whites. You see that we tend to talk about non-Hispanic whites as as the majority population is the largest number, but you can see here that the percentage increase was just 4%. The percent of all growth was just 11%. So that really we're seeing, because of the rapid growth of the Latino population and because of the stagnant growth of the Anglo population, this is why the transformation that I'm talking about, the growth of Latinos as the majority of the state, is happening so rapidly. So this slide is showing you two different projections, two different scenarios of population growth in the state of Texas from the year 2000 to the year 2040, with a base year of 2000. You see on this slide that the numbers here are not percentages. These numbers are in millions, right? So you see that in the year 2000, there were about 11.1 million, or there were 11.1 million non-Hispanic whites counted in the census. There were 6.7 million Latinos counted in the census. Then you see in the 2010 census, actually in the second table, the number in figures in parentheses shows the actual count of the groups, showing that our bottom projection there, the short-term growth migration scenario, actually captured what happened in the decade pretty well. But what I want to call to your attention is the relative growth of the Anglo population. The Anglo population in these projections basically peaks within the next decade. It peaks about 2020 and then will actually shrink thereafter. And this is with all scenarios, and this is, I'm pretty confident about this. Why am I so confident about the fact that the non-Hispanic white population is going to shrink in the state in the near future? I'm so confident because this is largely based on the age structure of the population. At this point, the Anglo population is overrepresented in the baby boom cohort. The baby boom cohort is no longer in childbearing age, so the crude birth rate for the Anglo population is low, and the crude death rate for the Anglo population is going to be high as that baby boom, the leading edge is now in its mid-60s. Very shortly, it's going to be in its, consider in demographers' time a decade is short. Within the next couple decades, this population is going to be aging into the 70 and 80 years old, and we can expect population decline through attrition, through mortality in this population. Now, look on the other hand at the Latino population. You see two different scenarios for the Latino population. They're quite different in 2040. One is 19 million, right? That's what I call the long-term growth migration scenario in the top panel, and then at the bottom panel you see 25 million. Now, what I want to point out about this is that the short-term or the long-term growth, the slow growth scenario, is still showing more than a doubling of the population from today in the next 30 years. The long-term projection is adding another 6 million. So the difference there is that we're not exactly sure. I have some thoughts, but we're not exactly sure what the migration is going to be. But based on age structure and birth rates, we're sure that the Latino population is going to grow, and it's going to grow rapidly, and it's going to surpass the Anglo population shortly. So this slide is showing you the new information here is the right-hand bar showing you the projected contribution of Latinos to the population change in Texas from 2000 to 2040, and it's basically over 80%. And this is the slowest growth projection we've got. In other words, this is the most conservative estimate of the contribution of Latinos to future state population growth. And as I'm fond of saying, this is can you all see the projected contribution of Anglos to population growth over the 40 years. If you can, it means you've got good eyesight, because that bar is very small. It's 3%. So really, again, this is the transformation I'm talking about. And again, these are Census Bureau projections for the nation as a whole. From 2010 to 2050, the Bureau is projecting, again, 65%, what was true in Texas in the last decade. It is projecting over the next 40 years that Latinos will account for 2/3 of all population growth in the United States. So when do Latinos pass Anglos in Texas as the largest ethnic population? Well, believe it or not, probably in the next 4 or 5 years. Certainly no later than 2020. By largest population, I mean that there will be more Latinos than Anglos in the state of Texas in 2020. There'll be no majority group. The right-hand column is showing you that sometime in the range of 2030, again, it depends on the migration exactly when, that the Latino population will be an absolute majority of the state's population. There will be more Latinos than all other groups combined. That's already true, by the way. In 2007 was a watershed year. 2007 was the first year that births in the state were a majority, 50% plus one of the births in the state of Texas were to a Latina mother. So in that sense, the changes that I'm talking about have already happened. A Latina child born in Texas right now is being born into a majority group, if you look just at that age. And this makes the point by showing you, again, this is by the slowest scenario of change, showing you a crossover in 2020. The dotted line going down in this slide is the percentage Anglo in the state population. The red line going up is the percentage Latino. So I want to look, in understanding this change, I want to look at a few demographic and social and economic characteristics. So this is one you don't usually see, but I think is really important, because one thing that you should be asking, that people sometimes do when I give these kinds of projections, I'm sometimes asked, well, who's a Latino? And that is not altogether clear anymore. It's not as if the population is closed and Latinos marry only Latinos and Anglos marry only only other Anglos. So you see here, these data are from a very recent American Community Survey data. This is a large national and state sample. It's showing you by the decade at which marriages occurred for the currently living population, the percentage of spouses for a Latina woman, the percentage of their husbands who were also Hispanic, and that number is down this is for the U.S. born. The number is down for marriages after the 1990s to 75%. So still a majority, actually going back up, and actually, oddly enough, I might expect that number to continue to go up, in the sense that as the marriage market becomes increasingly Latino, increasingly everybody, including Anglos, will be marrying Latinos and Latinas more, and that's not a paradox. Actually, that's not a contradiction. It's because as Latinos become a majority of the population and a large majority of people of marriageable age, you're going to see more and more marriages to Latinos, and this is the comparable data for men. A little less intermarriage on this side, but nonetheless, the point I want to make here, and again in keeping with my theme of diversity, is a 20-25% intermarriage rate when you spin it over generations is going to create a lot of change. It means that as we continue to have high rates of immigration to the state and to the nation, you're going to continue to have persons with a new first experience living in the United States. At the same time that the Latino population is increasingly going to include fifth, sixth, seventh generation people who of mixed ancestry, right? And this situation is something actually, another population, as Norma mentioned at the beginning, that I've studied a lot is the American Indian population. And the American Indian population kind of leads Latinos in this, in the sense that there is so much intermarriage in that population that you have, again, just a very wide diversity of many Indians who, a majority of their biological ancestors are not American Indian, while you still have pockets where there's a lot of intermarriage. Well, the Latino population lags far behind that, but it's moving in that direction. And as the generations pass by, and generations do pass by quickly, right? We're going to see greater diversity in the ethnic composition of the Latino population in this sense. This is a population pyramid. You probably are all familiar with population pyramids, but you've probably never seen one quite like this. Population pyramids typically, but it's showing you along the axis. I guess I should use the cursor. What you see along the axis here is single years of age, so that each bar represents the number of people of single years of age. Instead of putting men and women, however, on this graph, I put Latinos on the left and Anglos on the right, so that you can see essentially the very differences in age structure. You see among the Anglos over here, you see this is the baby boom. Right, and the end of the baby boom, the echo boom, but increasingly we're seeing a rectangularization, basically, of the age structure of the Anglo population. On the other hand, among Latinos, you see essentially a very large number of young adults, and then also a large number of children. Now here I've added in the immigrant portion of the population, so that you see essentially immigration tends to occur in adulthood. If we look at 1- and 2-year-olds, almost all of the Latinos in the state are native born. This is giving you, again, a flavor of the change. We have high immigration of working age adults, and then we have, following that, a very rapid growth of the native born population. Such that, again, you'll see what I suggested before. Look at the younger cohorts here are about 200,000 Latinos per each single year of age, compared to 150,000 Anglos. So again, this is when I talk about the fact that that a Latino born in this state is born into a majority group. That's true. If you're looking at the population of children. Next thing I want to talk about shortly is, or briefly, is immigration. This slide is showing you the growth of the Latino population of the country in the state by citizenship status. You see in this slide that approximately for the state of Texas, approximately 30% of the population is immigrant. It's a little bit. It's closer to 40% for the United States as a whole. You see that the immigrant population as a whole, or the Latino immigrant population as a whole, in 2010 was 2.9 million in the state of Texas, of which approximately, or 2.2 million, approximately 25% of the entire Latino population are non-citizens. You know, a lot of people will ask me about this question. We know that a substantial component of the population, the immigrant population of the state and the nation, are undocumented. So here I've dragged and dropped. This is not my work. This is the work of Jeff Pissell and Devera Cohn at the Pew Hispanic Center. They estimated that in 2010 there were about 11.2 million undocumented migrants living in the United States, and about 1.67 million living in the state of Texas. Actually, their estimates show declines of about 1 million in the unauthorized population living in the country between 2007 and 2010 because of the recession. Although what's happening in their data confirm is that a lot of the recession throughout the South caused a lot of Latinos to move home to places like Mexico and Texas. So the Texas population actually grew. But we see here then, just in relative terms, we see about 1.6 million unauthorized migrants living in Texas. And keeping in mind that not all unauthorized migrants by any means are Latino, but that contrast that 1.6 million to the 2.2 million non-citizen Texans living in the state in 2010. So a substantial component are likely, more than half are likely unauthorized. And again, in understanding the diversity of the population, the growing diversity of the population, understand essentially that we've got a very large undocumented population, typically with not only documented, but U.S.-born, native-born, they can be president of the United States just as much as Barack Obama. Children living in the same households on the one hand. On the other hand, you have, again, a growing late generation multi-ethnic Latino population, a result of many generations of intermarriage. This slide reflects the work of a demographer named Robert Warren, who estimated that throughout this decade that the undocumented population of the state is growing by about 50,000 a year. And then finally, this is reinforcing the point that I showed before, that although I said that immigrants are about 30%, 31% of the, 32% in 2008 total of the state's population, you see that figure peaks in young adulthood in the range of 50% of the Latino population, and is much lower among children, and it's much lower among older adults. So again, to conclude these thoughts about Latino population growth, it's going to be accompanied by increasing socioeconomic diversity, increasing diversity in immigrant status, nativity and citizenship, and increasing ethnic diversity, both in terms of the growth of non-Mexican Latino populations, but also growing intermarriage between Latinos and other groups. This last point is one that I think is very important. In Texas, Latinos will be the majority of many subpopulations. For example, the middle and upper classes, even if relative rates of disadvantage don't change. I'm about to show you some slides about socioeconomic status. But one way, I did a calculation about a year ago that, you took that kid born in 2007 who was born into the new Latino majority in the state. By the time that kid, he's going to turn, or she's going to turn 22 in what? And that means, what's 22 plus 7? That's 20, about 2029 or 2030. I did the calculation, that by that point, the majority of upper income households in the state of Texas will be Latino, even if, under the assumption that the gap between the populations doesn't change. In other words, the growth of the population, the absolute growth of the population, is going to overwhelm any rate of disadvantage or something like that, to say that by the time, as I say, that child born in 2007 is entering the labor market, he or she will be entering a labor market in which essentially the majority of upper middle class households will be headed by a Latino. And I think that is important, again, because, to get rid of a stereotype that many of us maybe still retain, from just a decade or two ago when nothing like that was the case. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the spatial distribution of the Hispanic and Latino population, and Mexican American population. So the first slide is a Census Bureau produced slide showing in the dark shaded areas where the Latino population is a substantial fraction of the population. This will not surprise you. I think it's true predominantly in the Southwest, in the Mexican areas, especially true in Texas along the border counties. Other areas in the country that have relatively large Latino populations include, of course, South Florida and the Pacific Northwest, the parts of the state of Washington. Now this distribution is changing. So this slide, again from the same Census Bureau produced report, is showing you where the population grew most rapidly in terms of darker shading. And you see in this that a lot of the population growth for the Latino population was in the upper Midwest and throughout the South. Okay, and this is predominantly this is partly Mexican, partly Puerto Rican, partly a result of the redistribution of native populations as well as immigrant destinations. But this is a slide that I produced that I think is very informative. It's about Mexican Americans only, not Hispanics as a whole, but Mexican Americans. And it shows, again, the shaded background is the county percent Mexican American. So you again see the predominance of Mexican Americans in the border region. But the other thing that I've shown you here is something that I call the median penetration line. And what do I mean by that? I mean that if you take the entire Latino population of the Mexican American population of the United States and ask how far they live from the border, and then draw a line that represents 50% of them live between that line and the border with Mexico, that line is in red. Okay, you'll see that line is just north of Los Angeles, goes through Las Vegas, goes through Albuquerque, and passes about midway between San Antonio and Houston. Houston is on the far side of the line. And again, I think this is something that as we talk about the dispersal of the Mexican population, we should remember how much of it, and I don't know about remember, maybe learn how much of it still remains concentrated very near the border, concentrated in an area where it's not clear when you are within that red line just who the dominant population is. By numbers, the dominant population are Mexican Americans in much of that area. So the cultural influence, of course, include cultural influences coming through cross-border exchanges. This is a slide that I use to remind people. People talk about the United States as a assimilating country, as a country where you come here and change your identity and characteristics and values. So my question is who's assimilating whom? All right, in the areas where Mexican Americans continue to be primarily settled, they are the majority group. Many of the Anglos I know that grew up in the valley, grew up near the Texas-Mexico border, are fluent Spanish speakers. Right, so it's important when thinking about assimilation, thinking about change, not to imply by any means that border Americans, border Mexican Americans, are identical in cultural attributes. Certainly, they're not with Mexicans. But they are perhaps, in some sense, a third force or a third group. As is often the case in border situations, where a distinctive culture that represents, mixtures and borrowings from multiple cultures takes root and sustains itself. And these next slides, again, are showing you that this one's a favorite, showing essentially that the newest migrants are bypassing that border region and are fanning out across the country, so that the median settlement line for in 2000 for Mexican origin people who had come in the past 5 years was nearly 400 miles from the border. Well, immigrants who would come before 1965 was only 126 miles. So the new migrants are not coming to the border primarily. They're bypassing the border, moving to cities like Houston and Dallas, and moving beyond the state of Texas throughout the United States. And you see that some here. Again, this is showing you the distribution of the Hispanic population by nativity, where blue is immigrant, and whatever this is, something between yellow and orange, I don't know, that's native. And you see here that the border populations, and look particularly at the San Antonio area, are predominantly native-born, and the immigrant action in the state of Texas is largely in Dallas and Houston. Again, something that people often forget, but is important in understanding who you're dealing with when you're dealing with different geographic components of the Mexican American population. A few slides about socioeconomic status. This is, and I have 4 slides, and these require some explanation. Here I am looking at the Anglo population from age 18 to 30 in the state of Texas. And why am I looking at the Anglo? Why am I looking at this age group? First, I'm looking at this age group because it's in some sense the next generation into the labor force, right? This is the generation, or this is the cohort that is still completing its education, if it is, and moving into labor force. So it's the future. And this is showing you the distribution by educational attainment and attendance of this Anglo population. So you see in the middle the bar there that some mark some college. What this is showing you is that 37% of the Anglo population of that age has had some college education, and but no college degree, and 20% of that age group is currently enrolled. Okay, and then so another way to look at this is the bottom part of the bar over on the left. No diploma, 6%. No diploma, not in school. That's another term for dropouts. So 6% of the Anglo population of that age group are dropouts. A majority of this population, if you add up all of the pillars from some college to the right, majority have at least had some college. Okay, now, so this is the African American population distribution. It looks actually substantially the same. There are some differences. There is less current enrollment. The no degree, no diploma, no enrollment percentage is 11% as opposed to 6%. Okay, now let's look at Latino natives. So we're seeing here 33% have some college. So if we add all of these bars up to the right of there, we still don't come to 50% with some college. 17%, however, are still enrolled. Of those with high school diplomas and no college, just 4%, and this is no college at the beginning of the year, just 4% are currently enrolled in school, and 16% have no diploma and are not in school. And this is showing you the Latino immigrant population. You see very different numbers here. Fully 52% have no diploma, and of those, the vast majority are not enrolled in school. I hesitate to call this school dropout because in many cases these folks came from a setting where still being in school at later ages would not necessarily be a norm. But nonetheless, again, this slide is illustrating 2 points. The contrast here is to show the importance of understanding the Latino population of the United States and of Texas. To understand, you always have to do this kind of disaggregation. If you just average the characteristics of natives and foreign-borns, you're going to come up with very different numbers from either group, and you're not going to understand the groups. So that frequently in talking about state policy, there's so much attention to the failure of our schools with respect to the Hispanic population. Well, this is the measure of that, and there is some element of failure here. There is a 16% status dropout among this young adult cohort. That's higher than any other group. But don't average in these numbers. But also understand that when we have immigration as a substantial driver of population growth, that you're going to get an educational distribution that looks like this. It means, and one of the difficulties that may be leading to this number, it means that so many of the Texas-born, United States-born children are the children of immigrants who themselves have very low levels of schooling. So the challenge in creating an educated workforce in this period where Latinos are going to be a majority of the workforce very shortly is that you're dealing with a large number of children of immigrants with low levels of schooling in U.S. Standards, and you've got to essentially turn them, if you want to reproduce your technician and engineer and professional workforce, you've got to move them through school, through college into professional school. And that's the challenge that we face. And these slides, I think I might, in the interest of time, slide by these fairly quickly. They're showing the same kind of information. This is Anglos and this is Latinos, showing you across cohorts the percentage with different levels of attainment. The primary observation that I would make out of this slide is that you don't see this top bar here is showing you the percentage with graduate and professional degrees at different ages. And what you don't see is much change. You don't see much change in the percentage. You see a little bit of an increase in the percentage with bachelor's degrees. But essentially, if this is going to be the workforce in 20, 25 years, one wants to try to make the distribution look like this. And I think, it's too complex to talk about these issues, but I do expect that that with growth, with diversity, there is going to become an increasing change in the educational distribution. But right now, it is still happening slowly, and right now, as we look at the transition of workforce cohorts in the next 10 to 20 years as the baby boomers rotate out and the new Latino majority rotates in. We have not yet experienced the massive changes that we're going to need. Health insurance and other characteristics. Again, a large measure of this slide. This slide is showing you these yellow bars are showing you the percent of the population of the state in 2010 by ethnicity and nativity that do not have any health insurance coverage whatsoever. It's 71% of the non-citizen Latino population, 34% of the naturalized Latino population, 26% of the U.S.-born Latino population compared to 14% of Anglos, 23% of African Americans, and 21% of Asians. So all Latino populations have both higher rates of lack of insurance as well as greater dependency on public-only insurance, Medicaid and Medicare, compared to other groups. Actually, non-citizens, of course, have very restricted access to public programs, so they have relatively few resources here. But again, the story is both the greater disadvantage, but also the sharp diversity, in particular the contrast between immigrants and natives. And this slide is showing you basically similar information for the nation as a whole, showing again that it is non-citizens that are responsible for the bulk of the uninsurance crisis of the Latino population. One important observation about this slide in particular is, I don't think any of us know quite what's going to happen with the Affordable Care Act over the next 5 or 6 years, what retrenchments or changes might happen. But I would point out that even if it's fully enacted, there's going to be one population group that's going to be really exposed in the state of Texas, and that's the non-citizen, particularly undocumented immigrant Mexican Americans. And by exposed, I'm saying that if the Affordable Care Act goes through and insurance coverage rates go up, the only people who will be presenting without insurance, and it will be a substantial population, it will be perhaps as much as 1/10 of the state's population, will be people who have no recourse, people who will be identified by their unauthorized status by the simple fact that they're not in one of the exchanges, they're not covered by any of the provisions of the Affordable Care Act. So it's in this state, with our maybe lack of forthrightness and maybe in some sense lack of interest in the undocumented population, this is going to be very challenging to a large group of people. The Hispanic paradox. Now, the Hispanic paradox is a term coined by my colleague Kyriakos Moukidis. He's going to be speaking to you next Tuesday, I think it is, in this series. He will tell you much more about this. I just wanted to briefly introduce the notion. Actually, all of the speakers this week will, one way or another, deal with elements of the paradox. And so what is the paradox? Well, as originally phrased, it's that the Latino population has mortality rates that are more like whites despite socioeconomic risks that are more like African Americans, okay? So one way to look at this is from starting in 2006, the National Center for Health Statistics now produces an annual life table for the Hispanic population and other races and blacks and whites by Hispanic status or non-Hispanic status. So you see here that you're seeing on the left the life expectancy at birth for men in 2007, and on the right, life expectancy at birth for women. You're seeing that In 2007, according to official NCHS data, non-Hispanic whites have a life expectancy males at birth of 75.8 years compared to 78.2 years for Hispanic men and 69.6 years for African American men. You're seeing among women that Hispanics have a life expectancy at birth of 83.4 years compared to 80.6 for Anglos and 76.5 for African Americans. So a stark difference, and again one that has been considered and was labeled paradoxical, because ordinarily we think of poverty as one of the best predictors of mortality. As we saw, the educational attainment levels and certainly the poverty levels of the Latino population are substantially well, the educational attainment is lower and the poverty rate is higher, yet Latinos tend to live in 2007, according to these data, nearly 3 years longer. So what gives? That's an important question for us to understand. So this is showing another version of the same data, again from the same source. This is showing you the ratio of the probability that you will die within the next year at each birthday for Hispanics compared to non-Hispanic whites. It's showing you the yellow line is for men, the blue line is for women. The most important thing to pay attention to is that at almost all ages after childhood, that line is below 1, the dark line at 1. So that dark line at 1 is equality. You're seeing essentially that what the data are saying, that at older ages, both men and women, Latinos have about 80% or 20% lower mortality in any given year. A striking differential, again made more striking by the socioeconomic differences. Now, it's also true in Texas. This is showing you age standardized death rates that I calculated. I want to say these are national data. These are Texas data from the beginning of last decade. And again, you see the same element of paradox. You're seeing the age standardized death rates for Hispanic men was 855 per 100,000 compared to about 1,000 for non-Hispanic white men, and it was 604 per 100,000 for Hispanics women compared to 767 for white women. So again, in the state of Texas, the same lower mortality is true. Now, we can do a few things to understand. We certainly do not understand completely why this is the case, but one thing we do know is illustrated by this slide, which is from a paper published back in 2004 by Irma Irlo and some colleagues that compared these rate ratios for men and women for persons born in Mexico compared to persons born in the United States. So what is this telling us? It's showing us actually that the immigrants, even though they are more disadvantaged, as you saw, than the natives, actually have lower mortality. That if you look at U.S.-born Latinos and Latinas, that the rate ratios are very close to 1. In other words, mortality rates are about the same as non-Hispanic whites, but they are substantially lower for immigrants. Now, the next two slides represent the work of L.J. Panis, who is in the room, a graduate student in PMCH. I want to particularly honor him by, when you're helped by students, it's customary to say, and if there are any mistakes, I'm responsible, not them. But you're really showing honor when you say, if there are any mistakes, it's his fault, right? Because this is his work, right? And what this is showing you is of those differences in life expectancy, I'm showing you first causes of death for which the rates are higher, the mortality rates are higher for Latinos than they are for Anglos. And you see here, that the leading cause, this represents essentially 57% of the difference, even though the difference favors Latinos, that in some sense, by an accounting measure, higher rates of diabetes mortality among men and women account for essentially disadvantaged Latinos. Among men, assault, read homicide, alcoholic liver disease, other liver diseases, a few cancers account for essentially, or several areas of disadvantage for Latino men. For Latino women, there are really not many striking differences other than the higher death rate from diabetes. The other extreme is showing you the causes that are associated with Latino advantage, and very interestingly, 79% of the differentials for men can be accounted for basically by lung cancer. Again, among women, you're looking at 41%. Chronic lower respiratory diseases are next. Causes associated with heart disease are next. So these are areas of advantage. So this slide goes a long way to helping us understand the Hispanic mortality advantage. It's smoking. It's Latinos, particularly Latina women, smoke a lot less. Smoking is a very stupid thing to do. It will kill you. I guess Latinos are smarter there. So basically, recent work has substantially confirmed that smoking explains a whole lot, or differences in smoking rates explain a whole lot of the differences in mortality. This is, I think, my last substantive slide, and it's making one point. It's showing you the percent of persons 65 years old and older in the state who report a self-care limitation. So these are the serious limitations. These are where you can't dress or bathe. You need help to toilet, to take care of yourself. These are where you need assistance. And what this is showing is that the rates are extremely high for Latinos, particularly immigrant Latinos, higher than for African Americans in the state. Again, nationwide data show a similar pattern. And what this is essentially reminding us, and it's part of the paradox, and again, I'm sure that other speakers, including Professor Markides, will explain this and discuss this in more detail, that mortality advantage occurs in a population that has high rates of morbidity, high rates of diabetes, high rates of disability. But even at older ages, even with that higher morbidity, they're living longer. And that, maybe even more than the socioeconomic component of the paradox, is really what I think today we think of as being the Hispanic paradox that we have to understand. So a couple concluding thoughts. Why are these differences? Well, very briefly, I haven't had a chance to introduce complete detail, and again, others will go into it. Smoking, diet, maybe differential experiences of stress, maybe different attributes of migrants are some of the reasons that people, essentially migrants are often thought to be selected, maybe selected to be tough, selected to have a stronger sense of self-efficacy than other people, maybe having mental attributes and characteristics associated with greater longevity. So these are some of the explanations we're looking at. But I think another, maybe even particularly more profound point to look at is that what this calls to our attention is that we really maybe don't understand how socioeconomic risks are associated with mortality, that we don't really, that it could be, in fact, that to be socioeconomically disadvantaged as an African American, as a Latino, as a white mean very different things and have very different mechanisms. So one of the reasons it's important for us to understand the Hispanic advantage is to essentially understand what they're doing right, to understand how this picture of high morbidity but low mortality can occur. And then, with respect to the overall themes of today's talk, I summarized a few here that I thought were very important, and to reinforce them. One, Latinos are the future majority of the state's population, and not long from now, the nation's going to follow thereafter. Latinos are an average and economically disadvantaged population on any measure, but there's a growing middle class. There will be increasing diversity of this population across nativity and immigrant generation. When Latinos are subdivided by nativity, immigrant-led households are much worse off than U.S. native-led households. Latinos experience lower rates of mortality than other groups, but higher rates of obesity, diabetes, and disability. But immigrant Latinos in particular experience mortality advantages compared to U.S.-born Latinos and non-Hispanic whites. So again, I've hoped through all of this to convince you that besides becoming the numerically predominant population, that this is now increasingly a diverse and complex population, and a lot of the old stereotypes that people approach this population with are simply wrong, and we need to get past them and understand the full diversity of the population. Thanks very much.
Well, I want to thank you for giving us a kickoff to the future lectures. And I know that it's time, but all of this presentation is being recorded, was recorded, and it's going to be available on our website. Also, we have been broadcasting throughout the country, throughout the other centers of excellence, so we welcome them as well. And you are welcome, I guess. Would you like to answer one or two questions since the audience is still here?
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere. If there are any questions or comments.
We have time for, and if you'd like to press this, please. Yes. Yes. So your question can be heard.
Carl, could you go to the slide with the population pyramid for immigrants versus native-born?
So that is,
That one.
this is here.
So for the Latino group, it looks like there's a bit of a decline around age 26, but among the immigrants, there's also a slight bulge. So I'm wondering if that's just an anomaly or if you think that something is going on in the mid-20s.
So you're referring to that one indentation right in the mid-20s, right around here. I'm actually, as I look at this, I'm suspecting the old problem of age heaping, because you notice that the next bar up is too large, so I do not know anything that happened in a single year that would account for that. So I'm assuming that's an issue of misreported age. Yes.
I have a question, and I missed the very first part, so I don't know if you were not talking about Latinos everywhere, but the Cuban Latinos and educational levels. Do you see a difference when you look at the actual nativity? I mean, the country's ethnic breakdown?
I have not extensively compared Cubans by nativity status since I've had a predominantly Texas and Southwestern Mexican American focus to my research. I think what we have typically said about the Cuban population, the Hispanic paradox that I described is largely a Mexican-American, perhaps a Central South American paradox and phenomena. Cubans have mortality profiles quite similar to those of non-Hispanic whites, and also educational distributions that are fairly similar. So, we just haven't noticed, or it's not usually talked about in the same terms. And I did not mention before, but Puerto Ricans actually do not participate in the, again, part of the reason the diversity of the population is important. I really don't like often to use national data that pool the different groups because Cubans and Puerto Ricans and Mexican Americans are all very different in their health profile and status. So again, when we use the common term, we're misstating for each group.
All righty. Well, we want to thank you again